Okay, sweet. So okay, good to go. Great. So let's Ronnie, ready to kick it off?
Yep.
Okay.
Should I start sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Wait, let me go back to the beginning. Oops. Okay, cool. Can you see me? Okay, cool. Hi, y'all. My name is Ronnie, and today I'm going to be talking about how we can connect blockchain to essentially the rest of the world. At any point you have questions, if I'm talking too fast, which is honestly kind of a thing, please stop me. And super excited to be here. Cool. So to get started, we're going to cover a few things today. So just highlighting a few things that you've learned over this past semester that we're going to jump back on. Then we're going to talk about some of the super cool applications that maybe gets us all excited about crypto and really the future possibilities in the blockchain space. Talk about these super cool things called oracles and how we design some of them, as well as who are some of the major providers currently. And then go into some example use cases of how these are used today and are really bringing super exciting and cool things. Cool. So first off, you've probably already seen this, but a few things I'd like to highlight. Really, when we talk about cryptocurrencies, we are looking at things that are not issued by a central authority and things that get there by distributed consensus. When we jump back to Satoshi, when he had his initial ideas of, crypto would be super cool, he really was looking at how many of the social contracts of the financial institutions that we use today maybe always didn't hold. For example, if you're thinking putting money in a bank and maybe the bank goes under, you don't get it back. So first, no central authorities. And then second is, in a blockchain, you don't have to trust other people. This is a very good idea of consensus, and especially Nakamoto consensus. I highlight these two things because we're going to jump back to them a bit later in the lecture and talk about how maybe they may get violated. And then secondly, you've already seen Ethereum, super cool thing. The main thing that we're going to take away from this again is smart contracts, really extending the super cool things that we can do in crypto and bringing a whole new space of what can we do to remove trust from even more interactions, but also now make things run autonomously. So bringing autonomous operations, not just to many of our finances, but to many other spaces such as insurance. Okay, cool. So initially, when I don't know about y'all, but when I got excited about crypto, I think about all these super different use cases that we have where we can build things that work autonomously to help reduce inefficiencies, to help people around the world, and to really have many of these super cool things that work. So for example, P2P lending, global payments is where it really starts. But now you can extend this to so many other things, such as how we keep information, how we ensure people do what they say they'll do, and how we can track things around the world to really ensure things happen as you expect. So for example, the whole idea of how we can verify trust can extend to the digital world as well when we look at smart contracts, notarization, and then other things. So even records, for example, if I want to share my healthcare records with my different doctors, I can keep that in an app and then just share the keys with them, which is super cool. So we are able to control our own data, control how it's used in many cases, and control many of the things that we do with it when we agree with other people. So this whole idea of distributed apps and ideally Web 3.0 later. Turns out the core idea of starting out with many of these cryptocurrencies, for example, Bitcoin, they really only give us the basic primitive of, hey, I can transfer this if I already know somebody else's keys. But doing other things with it's kind of difficult. So if I want to say, hey, I'll give you money if you give me food, for example, there's no way to really verify that using the initial primitives that were given by the system itself, because it doesn't know that like, oh, you've given me food or anything. All it knows is at some point in life, you can do this transaction. So kind of like Venmo. Oops, sorry, let me open chat also on the side. Cool. Okay, so turns out, from my understanding, a lot of people in this class are excited about DeFi space. So I brought some examples from there. On the right, you may see MakerDAO, which is essentially a portfolio that can, let's start on the top left. It's Origami Network, which essentially lets you build decentralized marketplaces. Then bottom left is a thing called token sets, which rebalances portfolios for you automatically. In the bottom right, we have the DeFi dollar, which is a stablecoin pegged dollar. And then top right, we have MakerDAO, which made blockchain in a sense quite famous and is able to do many cool DeFi things that we see today. And it turns out these are all applications of using this thing called Oracle that we'll use today. I'll talk about more today. Cool. So throughout this, we're going to be using a set of metaphors that you may or may not be familiar with. SpongeBob as our two main characters. Previously in classes, as well as this class, you may have seen Alice and Bob as, of course, and Eve as the evil middleman, perhaps. Instead, we will have SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton. Almost forgot his name for a minute there. Cool. So as our motivating example, we want to bet on how many times Plankton will try to steal a Krabby Patty. Like usual, it's just like, probably not that many times. But then Mr. Krabs, of course, wants to make more money. So he wants to bet on it. And they both know that they don't always necessarily agree. So we want to have some sort of smart contract that can verify that they'll actually not be able to kind of weasel their way out of this. They are going to have an enforced contract that will sit on a chain somewhere. And that way they can verify that no matter the outcome, the expected result will happen. So now jumping back a bit, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, yes. So we just talked about how it's a decentralized trust model. And most importantly, when we do consensus, there's always one right answer. So the nice thing about this is your consensus tends to work. We can always extend your current blockchain, ideally your nodes, assuming that you have the no adversarial actors in it. Will add on new blocks to your current chain, and that thing will work. The issue, though, is when you look at the blockchain, it's kind of like living in Bikini Bottom, where you know all of your neighbors. Therefore, if you ever have questions, you can ask them, hey, what's up? Therefore, we can always validate. But when you want to talk about the rest of the world, it's kind of hard because you can't really get a train to just, get one of those like ship boat things to the rest of the world. All you have is the inside. So that's first. Second, you, of course, do have the usual civil tax, and you still do have mining incentives. So we will bring those back a bit later. Okay, cool. So now when we think back to kind of Bikini Bottom, you can pay everyone in your world because you see them. You can literally walk to their house and you can pay them. But let's say you want to pay someone in a different portion of the world. So let's say you want to pay them in, oh, interesting, I forgot the slide. Either way, let's say you want to pay them in like Squidward's new house or a different town over. It's hard to do that because your blockchain doesn't necessarily give you a functionality to pay people on other chains, or to pay people who may not be on your chain, or to pay when you like go to a restaurant and say, hey, I want to pay with my like crypto thing. There's not necessarily connectors for that, which is difficult. First. Second, as we just covered, your blockchain always will agree when it tries to add new nodes and when you try to add new transactions. But the question is, what happens if it doesn't always agree, which would be problematic. So we can't really connect, again, the rest of the world like Bikini Bottom to this town of Squidward's Town of New Acres, but what if we could? So that would be super cool. And the whole idea is we can now bridge applications. So kind of like when you have SpongeBob and come to the real world, if we could connect different blockchains and we could have blockchains do things dependent on the real world, that would allow for a significantly larger just world space of things that we can do. Because if you could enforce contracts and you can enforce transactions and you could connect all these different systems, you would be able to do so much more, especially when you consider much of our current data resides in systems that maybe are not blockchain enabled currently. When you look at, for example, health data, financial data, they all currently aren't sitting on a chain. So if we could connect to those and bring those into this blockchain world, that would be super awesome. And that's how we get back to this idea of DeFi in a sense. So the whole idea of that is called the blockchain oracle. This is where our first magical word pops up. So this blockchain oracle is this thing in the middle, which sits between our blockchain universe and the rest of the real world. And even more powerful, if we now look at the rest of the world, which has all of its existing protocols and this connector, mediator in between the rest of the world and our blockchain world, we can connect it to things such as Ethereum and run contracts on it. So what this means very powerfully is you can run a contract based on something in the real world, which is kind of a mind-blowing expansion into the world of possibilities. Now you can literally say, dependent on a real world event, I can change properties of my system. I can, which is very, very expanding to the world of possibilities there. Okay, cool. So this is called the Oracle problem fundamentally, and that is number one, blockchains by themselves can't access data outside. So when you think of any crypto that you've talked about currently, generally you talk about things that you can do within the system or other actors in the system. You don't talk about things outside. So it's a very fixed universe, and this extends that massively. But the difference is by now letting essentially everyone in. So the idea being if you let random people just move into Bikini Bottom, now you don't know everybody in Bikini Bottom anymore, and that could be kind of dangerous. So many of our advantages that exist currently are dependent on the facts that we know about our world. So for example, if I know the guy next to me in Bikini Bottom is named this, but he starts changing his name, that would be problematic. So now many of our smart contracts could work differently than we expected them, is the major security risk here. So super cool in that we can bridge everything together, but now we're also introducing this new problem. So when you design this idea of intermediaries between everyone else and of course a blockchain, there's tons of different trade-offs. And these are some of the ones that are popularly looked into right now. So will it be a software or hardware oracle, software or a hardware oracle? Will it be an inbound or outbound, i.e. will your blockchain application call externally to get information, or will some external application put things on your blockchain or inside your transaction history so that you can reference it later? So will it be inbound or outbound? And then lastly, what level of centralization will it be? So some things that would be useful over here are, for example, let's say we had a hardware oracle. You could have a major retailer such as Walmart say, dependent on these transactions, if somebody scans a barcode, we can give them an automatic coupon. So then when you go to your local Walmart and you just like buy a few things, they can automatically send you coupons dependent on some external barcode when they scan it. Or when you a software oracle could be, let's say, a price feed or an airline airline ticker, for example. So an example of that would be if your airplane is running late or a certain stock that you see massively skyrockets, you can do something in comparison. So this is actually a direct company that makes airline insurance, where if your airline's running late, they will file paperwork for you and they will refund you. Super useful there. Then inbound versus outbound, exactly what we just talked about. Where do you put the data that you want to use for this? So all of our smart contracts need to operate on some level of data so that they can do an actual action. But where do you want to put it? Do you want to put it on your chain? Do you want your chain to call out? Is another consideration there. And then lastly is what level of centralization versus decentralization do you want for your Oracle? So your Oracle being a transparent process and how it gets data means that it will either be like one, let's say a function in like your Solidity, which will call out and then do things, or perhaps it'll go to a network who will say, this is actually what the answer should be. So an example of this is if you have only one node and it says, the sky is blue today, but it changes its answer, that would be problematic. Versus if you had a bunch of different nodes and you asked them and they agreed that the sky was blue, you can be more sure of their response. So very similar to what we see earlier when we say that we want some level of consensus for our blockchain so that we know the next thing we're adding on is actually true. It turns out oracles have the exact same problem, where when you're asking them for information, how do you know that they're not lying to you? Cool. And then just a few things as note, these tend to be more rare, but are kind of interesting use cases in that you can have a human oracle. So an idea of this would be, let's say your contract wants to ask which of these two is better, or how is this going to work kind of thing. You can literally just drop a human in and say, this human will make the decision or will choose between these different options, as well as you can make very contract specific oracles. So you have a very complicated contract that needs like 5 different stages. You can build the oracle specifically for that in order to count those different stages in the overall contract. So just a thing to mention, not that common though. Okay, cool. So thing to mention now is, as we covered, it's a cryptocurrency, the like, but the decentralized trust model, this is the thing that we really want to highlight here. There is one right answer in the past, but, and then we see the usual consensus mechanism here. But the issue is if the oracle is compromised, now the smart contract on it, relying on it is also compromised, which means in the future, there could be multiple right answers. This is a problem. The idea of only one right answer is one of the fundamental underlying assumptions that we use when we do consensus and when we look at what our oracle, and then we look at our blockchain. The whole point of having a blockchain is you don't necessarily need to believe only one centralized party because everyone's verifying it, right? That's the whole point of ensuring that we have lots of people that are participating in it. But now if your blockchain is relying on information from externally, that becomes a problem. So let's say you have, let me jump back. Cool. So let's say you have a bunch of these. Let me jump back on. Okay, cool. Let's say you have a smart contract that says, I will give Plankton $10 when the Krabby Patty, sorry, I will give Squidward $10 when the Krabby Patty gets stolen. But the oracle for it that tells the smart contract when the Krabby Patty gets stolen isn't actually working. So let's say that's owned by Plankton, and Plankton and Squidward are collaborating together. This means that now your smart contract isn't actually working like you intended. It's getting lied to. Because you are now using this intermediary blockchain, it means that Squidward and Plankton can work together. Before, you couldn't run a smart contract saying how many times is the Krabby Patty getting stolen. But now, because you did it, you're getting lied to, which is a problem. So the idea is, how can we make a smart contract that doesn't necessarily have that issue? And one of those tends to be using a decentralization. And that also helps us avoid some sort of, that helps us avoid getting lied to, which is this man in the middle. Is known as a man in the middle attack. Okay, cool. And then we can see over here, there's a fake SpongeBob among all of our SpongeBobs, and that's problematic. Cool. So when we look at who provides an oracle, you can make your own, but there's also a marketplace for this. Like many other things, it turns out that oracles are a very big portion of building a blockchain and building cool smart contracts, which means there are people who help you get a lot of that initial software, the initial best practices, and the initial marketplace up. And the most common one, kind of the standard right now, is Chainlink. There's also Witnet and Provable / they're now known as Oracleized, but those are less common. Chainlink is really the major player in the space. So when you think of Oracle, one of the things that we talked about right now is centralized or decentralized. And each of these 3 different Oracle providers are different companies, has a different take on how they think the best way to design it is. So we just talked about 3 different categories of trade-offs. They make their own trade-offs and they argue, oh, I think this is the best. So one of the problems that we talked about is if you ask one person only, what is, for example, the color of the sky outside, they can lie to you. So Chainlink says, what if we ask like 8 different people and we take the best, we take the majority there. That's probably the right one. Versus Witnet will say, we'll take a random group of people and then we'll incentivize not lying to us using a token. So just like a lot of the minor incentives in the real world, in the crypto mining space, versus Provable and Oracleized will say, hey, we'll just ask a random oracle or a random person who says that they can run this question for us. And they'll also generate an authenticity proof for us about how they got that answer. So 3 different ways. Chainlink is really the current standard, but just different ways of doing it. And it's super nice that Chainlink is, by middleware, I mean, it is literally a function that you can just add into your Solidity code, which lets you just easily include it, versus Witnet is actually a completely different blockchain where you have to write a bunch of things and then do a connection between the blockchains to get the results. And then Provable and Oracleized is also another function which you can just drop into your code, which is super nice. So that's also should be a consideration likely. And then you can see a few others here. Cool. And we just talked about this. Chainlink uses consensus between different nodes. Witnet will give you money if you give the right things. And Provable will use authenticity proofs. Cool. And we're going to dive a bit more into Chainlink, just since that's the major player here. And most of the standards, that's kind of interesting to dive more into. But they, as we just mentioned, uses Reviable, tamper-proof, input-outputs, smart contracts, and the like. What this means is they created a marketplace for being an oracle. So just like in Bitcoin, where you have full nodes and you have sort of light nodes, in Bitcoin, if you're a full node and you help the network run by validating these different things, you get money. Chainlink went with the exact same idea and said, hey, oracles kind of look like being a full validator node. So if we help you get the answer for your smart contracts, we can give you money also. So they have a whole marketplace where you can decide, hey, I want to help Chainlink. I will run a node and I'll tell Chainlink, hey, I can do this with this safety. I'll probably be up, so availability this often, and I'll probably be right most of the time. So whole marketplace where you can decide to run one of these providers of the Oracle service for other programs and then connect to different things. So these connections are called, okay, cool. Yeah, you can decide to run it and you would be one of these, oops, I can't zoom. You would be one of these squares over here in the Oracle network. And that goes to Chainlink's network, yes. And then you can see the incoming here would be a smart contract that's asking, and the outgoing would be your response. And this is kind of funny because, again, a marketplace, so the Mr. Cabbage's guy with his own marketplace. And then the next question is, okay, cool. So like, I'm asking Chainlink for information, but what can I ask about? So we give examples like maybe airplanes could make airplane insurance, SpongeBob, Plankton, Mr. Krabs, Squidward can use a hardware sensor to have this idea of betting on how often the Krabby Patty will get stolen. So that's another thing. We can get information from like websites. We can get stock market information. You can get price feed information. So all of those different ideas of where can I get information are called external adapters. And that is how different nodes will connect to different things. So I could run a node that says, hey, I'll give you information on what the price of Google is today. And 2 or 3 other nodes may do that. And that way we can get consensus among ourselves. And then different nodes will be able to connect to different external adapters. And then they can also sign the data that they get. But that is not the top usage here of actually being right or not. It's just saying who gave me which result. So that way we can see later that this is who gave which result, and that's also how I get my money from the Chainlink network, which is called a link, ironically. Cool, and now diving into Chainlink a bit more, the question is, so do we put the answer, so after you ask me for what's the weather, do I put it on a chain somewhere, like on a blockchain somewhere? Do I keep it off chain and you come get it? How do I get it? And one of the ways to do that is called commit reveal. This is the same thing that happens in portions of Ethereum, I believe. So what happens is I will commute an answer and then I'll hash it. And then I'll put that to, I'll tell Chainlink that. And that way, when you have other people, they can't cheat off of my answer. So this is going way back to miner incentives, where we say, now that we see that Chainlink kind of looks like a cryptocurrency inside of itself, what's the point of even being truthful? Why can't I steal other people's answers to get the most money out of it? And the idea there is there's these different ways of answering built in that help to mitigate that. Just like previously when we saw in crypto that there are different incentive structures that will fight against or de-incentivize the lying, cheating, trying to get ahead of other miners. And then the second option is called Schnorr extinguishers, which is a bit more involved, but you can do some hashing and some other things to ensure that you're actually writing the correct data offline. Okay, cool. And now the actual use case that you may be more interested in is MakerDAO. So MakerDAO works on DAI, which is this unbiased cryptocurrency and decentralized stablecoin. And MakerDAO is able to run its exchanges offline using DAI. So then the question is, how does it actually peg the stablecoin DAI to these different currencies? So how does it decide that, oh, today it's worth this much? And other systems will use liquidity where they will run arbitrage between the actual currency and the actual stablecoin so that they ensure that there's never too much of a delta. So that will be using incentives to create it. MakerDAO in this case actually uses oracles, a system of oracles, I think it's like 10 or 12 different ones, where they will use the median price returned by those in order to peg the stablecoin. And that's the underlying for how it values the DAI cryptocurrency here, which is super useful. And then this connects way back to why we care about oracles and a very common use, a very significant use of oracles that we can see. And then some other cool things are being able to, of course, make like airplane insurance based on things, being able to do betting. So literally there's a thing called Augur where you can bet on the state of the world. So if this is going to happen or not, there's insurance smart contracts. You can literally do supply chains, for example, where you can say, if this person sends me this, or like Amazon scans a package, we can then update our blockchain to record it. So super useful things with oracles. And this is an example here where you can see that depending on the Ethereum price and the medianizer results from the oracle, we're able to peg the actual tokens so that this underlying protocol works. And then now jumping a bit to Uniswap, this is one of the oracles that they actually use. And here's some code at the bottom where they gave, and this is an example of storing the price data on an actual chain that is used to help power these different things. So just for a mini recap of Uniswap before that, it's Decentralized Finance Protocol. It's essentially a decentralized exchange. So Coinbase, of course, just IPO'd. And similar to at an airport where you go and you're like, hey, I have this money, I would like to change it out for a different currency. Here, you're able to have an automatic protocol that will be able to exchange between currencies using relative supply and demand to help control liquidity. And this is just an example of how they store their cumulative price on an actual chain, which then other cryptocurrencies, or sorry, other crypto protocols can call via oracles in order to use that information in its smart contracts. Yes. Okay, cool. That was the end of that.
Awesome, thank you, Ronnie. I think there are a couple questions in the chat for you, if you want to look at those.
Okay, cool. How does an authenticity proof work? From my understanding, it is similar to signing your results before you give it. You can look into their white paper. Unfortunately, I don't believe Oracleize is very popular with the, like if you look at the top 3 Reddit posts on it, I don't believe it's that popular right now, but I could be 100% wrong. So I don't want to make any claims there. Stake of proof, which is used in staking PancakeSwap. Not fully sure. I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. And then what's the difference between ETH mainnet and Binance Smart Chain in your opinion, which you think is better? Do you think Uniswap is better than PancakeSwap? I think these are questions that may require a bit more detail to necessarily make assertions of better, since of course both teams have competitive trade-offs that they may be making to ensure different considerations there. Yep. Oh, very interesting point. One thing to also note is just given the context, oracles here do have some overlap with the idea of an oracle in computer science, but they're slightly different. Here it's used, the same overall idea of getting information from somewhere is there, but the data access and maybe other things here are not. Also, one thing to emphasize, I may have skipped over that slide. Where'd it go? Huh. Okay, I don't know where I left the slide. Either way, creating a good oracle is an open research problem. It is very difficult to create oracles and then to verify that what you expect will actually happen. Yep. And an oracle itself require an oracle. Yes, the thing also to highlight there, I don't know if I maybe emphasized that enough, is that an oracle in itself could require an oracle, 100%. It's essentially a recursive market all the way down, where how do you tell if somebody's being truthful? It also gets back to this idea of fault tolerance in your network. Yep. Cool. Okay then. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I was gonna wait for everybody else to ask their really smart questions, but I really, who's like not a technologist, someone who doesn't code. I'm really curious, like, as someone who's like really novice, and I'm really trying to, like, my summer goal is I like bought a bunch of Udemy courses on Python and all that shit, you know? Where do you find oracles as a concept thing for like a novice person? Is this something you should worry about much later on, or is this like a concept you should try to wrestle with much earlier on in your discovery?
I'll be quite honest. I think everyone else in this chat is, everyone else in this call is more qualified to answer that than I am. I believe that many, for example, Chainlink has put in a ton of work. They have a whole tutorial series about how to integrate their oracles with your existing Ethereum smart contracts. So yeah. Yep.
I'm gonna check out for sure. Yeah, no, thank you for the presentation. I have a lot to think about.
Excited for yours.
Thank you, Ronnie. Very excited for Kirby's. That was awesome. Also, just gonna point out, only 9 people getting their extra credit attendance right now. And I really want every single person on this call to get that 10 points. Oh, wait, that's a different thing. Get their lowest discussion rate dropped. 10 points for filling out the feedback form, which I will link at the end of this lecture. Thank you all to those who have already filled it out. So turn your camera on if you're able, or be active in the chat, because you just saw an awesome presentation and you're about to see an awesome presentation. So take advantage of it.
So is that my transition?
Yeah, sorry. All right, now everyone, Kirby Lynch.
No, it's great. It's great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna put my timer on so I don't get all talkative. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Kirby Lynch. I am a current PhD candidate in the Department of Geography. So I'm really, really happy to just be with you all, because geography is totally not related to blockchain, right? On surface, but really I got into blockchain as a byproduct of like how cryptocurrency was fundamentally changing how people even understood fiat currency, the monetary system, all of this stuff. You know, I think Bitcoin served as a larger vehicle for people to start thinking about finance, capitalism. So me personally, I joined in the fight, and I was like, hell yeah, let me get involved in it. So I just want to say thank you to Blockchain at Berkeley for the opportunity to be a lecturer tonight, and for also being a member of the education team. And if you're also in this decal and you're not in Blockchain at Berkeley, I hope you join and keep building up the organic intellectualism that is occurring in this space. My presentation, oh, can I get screen sharing access? Maybe if I'm like co-host.
Yes, you should have it now. Sorry about that.
There you go. Leo. So the title of my talk today is Blockchain and the Black Revolution, Use Cases for Social Change. Again, my name is Kirby Lynch, coming all the way from the Department of Geography. And really the point of my talk is to really get y'all just aware that state repression is on the rise and that we have to organize. You know, state repression is a very serious issue. It is the precursor to fascism and all kind of fascist totalitarian regimes. We first see these mechanisms of surveillance. We see everyday life being kind of like enclosed and contained and confined, and people losing their autonomy day by day. And so really, the point of this presentation is to make your mind open to the possibilities of what is really going on in this world, what a lot of what's complexly being presented to us on the media is only one half of the story. And so I'm trying to share the other half from really a social justice perspective, and how blockchain can be used as a really beneficial aspect for the Black Revolution. The lecture, we're gonna go over many things, but here's like a big summary, high level of where we're gonna go tonight. First, we're gonna talk about blockchain and cybersecurity, and why we're even here tonight, and why I'm even interested in blockchain. We're gonna talk about Black economic subordination, right? How do we move from racial oppression, right, which is the basis of the economic system of plantation slavery, to this situational relationship of economic subordination, where we have antagonisms in our everyday economy that is creating a dynamic of the have and the have-nots, right? We're going to talk about that, which then is going to lead us into a conversation about hypercriminalization and hypersurveillance, which is going to get us therefore into how blockchain can be used as a form of dark surveillance to really fight back against these oppressive regimes. And ultimately, how do we use blockchain, cryptocurrency as a moment to think about sovereignty over capital, right? As a political direction that we should be heading in the cryptocurrency space. So the big question is, all right, Kirby, blockchain, Black Revolution, sell it to me. And so, you know, we're here today to think about all of the concepts that you've learned in this fundamentals class and really put it into action and put it into practice and see how these tools can be actually utilized for liberation, for the freedom movement right now. And so, you know, again, how will blockchain transform cybersecurity? My hypothesis is that blockchain will transform cybersecurity by providing tools to establish Black community political sovereignty. That the blockchain is more than encryption and secrecy, but it's really about having the ability to build a system of Black autonomy in the World Wide Web, even if Black autonomy is not actually achieved in real life. You know, here are the different tools at our disposal as technologists to build infrastructure, to build systems, again, to establish Black community political sovereignty, which historically has been denied to the Black community. So the larger aims of this lecture is, again, social science at the core, but it's historical and it's grounded in the urgency of this moment. And so objectively, we should be able to know and be able to apply the concepts, the tools, the frameworks for building blockchain decentralized applications for social justice, right? And the reason why this is just important to think about social justice and why we should center social justice in blockchain application development is because at the core of even how cryptocurrency or the crypto movement starts is about social justice, right? Eric Hughes, who writes the Cypherpunk Manifesto, is a graduate student who's working in Soda Hall in the mailroom. And I can definitely identify as a overworked, underpaid graduate student where, you know, you're intellectually producing so much knowledge, you begin to question, like, why am I even producing all of this knowledge for the benefit of this corporation known as the University of California at Berkeley, right? So crypto, the Cypherpunk Manifesto, and the origins of this movement is all about social justice. It's all about calling to question the contradictions in our civil society. You know, when we're talking about less trust, more truth, you know, that is at the core what blockchain is about, and that's at the core, really should be our political philosophy in this space. And the reason why we have to orient ourselves towards social justice is because currently at the moment, blockchain is largely being associated with white supremacy. The January 6th insurrection had a lot of discourse attached to it that much of that action was organized on the blockchain on all of these decentralized applications. Here's an article from USA Today where they said how white supremacists and other extremists raise money from legions of online followers, right? There were people who were studying the ledger and trying to match these public keys and, you know, really trying to do financial forensics on the ledger, right? Right, and we're actually seeing a network of white supremacy and other white nationalist organizations rise up on the blockchain for a fact. But, you know, how do we fight back against this moment? How do we fight back against this power structure actually being established on the blockchain? How do we respond with our own alternative communities that can be just as powerful, right? It hurt that those 8 women were slaughtered in Atlanta, right? And it's because that we don't have the tools to really fight back against these very powerful movements, right? And particularly movements of white supremacy in this country, right? And blockchain, again, has largely been associated with white supremacy and white nationalist organizations. DefCAD is a decentralized file sharing platform where people can exchange 3D printing gun files with each other, right? But then if we really think about the demographics of who uses that site and people who have spoken up in support of that site, it has largely been demographically white men. And really the fear there is, what does it mean that there's an underground network society of guns trading digitally, right? The Supreme Court in the Ninth Circuit just made 3D gun files legal, right? So we're really fighting against power. We're fighting against the consequences of decentralized file sharing. And that's why we have to engage this fight, honestly, y'all. There is so much going on. Okay. Any questions before I kind of move on? Are we good? I see the chat blowing up. Okay, cool. Not for me. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Okay, Cardano. Okay. Yeah, literally, Cardano is an interesting project. Okay, so yeah, we'll talk about all of that because that's important. Like, so another issue that's going on in blockchain right now, right? So again, we have white supremacy, fucking gun file sharing and 3D printing land, decentralized file sharing, all types of shit going on in the dark web, blockchain, blah, 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 all the fucking like fear mongering rhetoric, right? And honestly, be mindful that that rhetoric is going to be appropriated by the US government in order to apply regulations to the blockchain, right? And now we know ultimately that we do need autonomous web spaces and spaces that are not controlled by the state, because we know that the state always works on behalf of the corporate interest, right? Particularly as in recent history, we have called ourselves in the United States an oligarchy. So we know that freedom ain't free, that this country, right? We are the 1% versus the 99%. You know, we have to be conscious of power, money, and circulation. And really why I titled this presentation, Blockchain and the Black Revolution, is that a revolution has to happen. So a concept I really want you all to be aware of is a concept known as Black economic subordination. This was a really cool concept from a scholar, Dr. Wilson. So if you want to hit me up for the reading, I can give it to you. But it was actually his social theory in the 1970s that came out that said, you know, what Black people will start to experience in this post-civil rights era is economic subordination that to shape itself to actually exclude Black people from actually being included into it. And so even when we're thinking about the rise of technology and the fact that 52% of technology companies in the world are in San Francisco, and the fact that we're dealing with these issues of gentrification and racial inequality, you know, this is not accidental. You know, these issues are so historic. You know, colonialism has had a huge impact on the United States of America since 1492, right? So we're really up against a 700-year system of colonial domination. But us as people being involved in the blockchain, being involved in cryptocurrency, we're actually in a very unique position to call bullshit, to call to question the power dynamic. And so what I'm showing you here is a slide. It's a slide representing the unbanked and the underbanked household by race and ethnicity. The reason why I want to show this is that the fundamental issue with Black economic subordination is that you will find yourself as a Black community without access to capital. You'll find yourself as a community without access to technical assistance. And these are fundamental things that make communities enterprise. And because of, you know, in 2020, 40% of the businesses that closed down in 2020 because of COVID were Black. What we're finding ourselves now, we're finding ourselves in a situation where Black people are finding themselves in the economic system. And so when we're thinking about the unbanked and the underbanked, you know, we're having this conversation in the blockchain right now, you know, thinking about third world countries in Africa and issues of the underbanked. But again, these are all historical issues. The reason why the Black community does not have any goes back to fundamental monetary policy, economics of this country with plantation slavery, that you have plantations without wages for 400 plus capital, which leads to the reserves that the United States can pull from, right? And so the economy is complicated, but constantly Black people are disenfranchised from having. That's why blockchain matters, right? The unbanked, when people are unbanked, they don't have access to capital. When they're underbanked, they don't have access to technical assistance, don't have access to commercial loans, don't have access to the technology that can help them to automate their business, right? So the gap is so large. And the reason why the gap is so large is because the value of the dollar is decreasing in value consistently. This is something that we always talk about in my global economic development class. But what I want you all to understand broadly is that there is so much manipulation with fiat currency. I mean, it really does start with the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. It really President Nixon when we decoupled the dollar from gold. It really does start when we start opening up the US oil capital markets, right? And we see that barrels of oil are fixed to the rate of the dollar. That throughout modern history, we're seeing the dollar being used as a weapon. As Peter Gowan considered this to be the dollar Wall Street regime. And the dollar Wall Street regime is something I really try to look up. He talks about this book, he talks about this theory in the book called The Global Gamble. And the global gamble, he just breaks down that regime, right? Where we see, you know, just really kind of in the dollar Wall Street regime, it is in this moment where the dollar becomes a tool to pretty much induce financial warfare. You know, we're actually seeing financial crisis being induced, right? The Asian financial crisis was a byproduct of the US manipulating the value of the dollar, right? This is all in the roots of the Washington Consensus. We're not going to get too deep in it in this lecture, but you know, these are all historical moments. I want you to go back and understand how this is impacting the validity of the dollar as the strongest fiat currency. But the reason why the dollar is coming up as a controversial entity and an economic instrument right now is because it's all political. And we live in very politically unstable times right now, right? So it's no coincidence that the world is falling, right? COVID, right? We have George Floyd, justice for Breonna Taylor, and then we also have Bitcoin hitting an all-time high, right? You have people like Rich Dad, Poor Dad being like, you know, cash is trash, put all your money into Bitcoin. You know, these market cycles are very convenient and they're very useful, right? They're useful for IPOs, right? If we're thinking about Coinbase. Finance capitalism is what makes US imperialism strong. And so that's why we want to have a critical understanding of our economy. Because if you know you're relying on UC Berkeley to give you some economic formula model and prediction to understand the world around you, it's not going to really get it. You know, there was no predictive modeling for state and federal prison growth. And really what I want to get you all to understand is that due to the manipulation in fiat currency, due to the rise of the dollar Wall Street regime, that we have now international corporations who have access to American banks and the capital of the American people untapped. And so when we hit a financial crisis in 2008, it was the everyday people who were blocked from lending, right? Nobody and their mama could get a house anymore. Everybody was being foreclosed in 2008, but it was still the corporations who got bailed out of the banks. It was still the corporations who were the priority, who were still getting the loans, but it wasn't our families getting loans to be in the homes. And so, you know, economics, this financial warfare, you want to make sure that with cryptocurrency, we're not adding fuel to that fire. We're not adding to the hegemonic power of the have and the have-nots. Because I want to show you this diagram of prison population growth from 1978 to 2012. The reason why prisons have grown, most importantly, is due to the criminalization of Blackness, has been due to the criminalization of poverty, right? There is a direct correlation between prison population growth and job decline in the United States of America. That, you know, prisoners are actually workers, y'all. That Victoria's Secret, Walmart, major corporations in the United States depends on the slave labor in states like Louisiana, Mississippi. So please, please do investigate the real reality of our economic system. Because at the end of the day, the reason why there is a huge prison population, primarily of African Americans, is because of the illicit market, right? Is because we do not have access to high wage jobs. UC Berkeley is less than 2% Black. California state prisons are 36% Black. So there is an intentionality to economic dispossession for the Black community. But we have opportunities to address this, right? We have the power as technologists to call bullshit, to call to question, right? Because I just want to share with you this stat, is that more people in 2019 were arrested for cannabis, right? Last year than for all violent crimes put together, according to FBI data. Let me read that again. More people were arrested for cannabis last year than for all violent crimes put together, according to FBI data. Okay? What I want to break down for you is that due to the fact that there are no job opportunities in the Black community due to economic class subordination, due to manipulation in the fiat currency market, due to international corporations having access to American capital, due to surplus capital coming from all of that free wage labor coming from the plantation slavery system for 500 years, you know, it's a really parasitic cycle. Very, very, very bad one. And so even the simple fact that even this whole idea about prisons and why the United States has the most prisons in the whole world is really rooted in what are those people even in jail for? You would be amazed how much people are in prison for cannabis related crimes. Most people have to have cannabis related crimes because that's the only market that have access to really being entrepreneurs in. So the illicit market, the intentional blocking out of Black community members from markets is actually driving the growth of prisons. And ultimately, you know, when we're talking about illicit markets and people's participation in selling cannabis because there's no real opportunities, what we're ultimately talking about is people's vulnerability to surveillance, right? When you are a criminal, when you are a felon, when you are a parolee, you are under state surveillance 100%, 24/7, 365 days a year. That in 1865, we were never really emancipated, right? The Emancipation Proclamation of 1865 said that slavery was ended, but we know that through the 13th Amendment that you can still be a slave if you are a criminal. So if you criminalize the Black community because all you do is surveillance them every day, I mean, it's just 1 + 1 is 2. So even in my own hometown, I grew up in a context of constant surveillance. I come from Vallejo, California, right now, right? And this is the power of education. I'm now in a position of power, and I have the knowledge and the education to really call the question, why is there surveillance cameras everywhere and you still can't find killers of young Black men? Why do you have stingrays in our communities? Why are you always watching us? Why is my cellular phone never operating correctly when I'm in this area of the city? And it's because the government, the US government is actually empowered and is authorized to actually surveillance the Black. I want to get into a conversation about why. Why do we surveillance Black communities? And, you know, I really do want to highlight my hometown of Vallejo, California. It was a deadly year. In 2020, we had our deadliest year since 1992. And so as a response, the city of Vallejo was given money. But instead of being given money to provide jobs to the community, they was given money for facial recognition software. They was given money for license plate recognition software. They were giving money for cell site simulators. They were giving money to set up surveillance programs instead of economic development, instead of workforce development. So we got to get real, because even if we think about the war on drugs, the 1980s was propaganda, right? It was propaganda to middle-class America that in the urban ghettos, there were these super predators, these young Black youth ready to kill the white suburban woman. And this was rhetoric that was preached by the American media. This was rhetoric that was put out even by Donald Trump when he was just an entrepreneur. He ran ads in the New York paper, you know, promoting the criminalization of all Black people, right? And so we can't really keep playing these games. During the war on drugs, we saw with the media, they tell you it's about stopping crime. We need more police to stop crime, but they never really stopped crime. There's more people in prison. And really what that moment was all about was the prevention of Black autonomy, was the funneling of more people into the prison industrial complex, was the elimination of Black students from the UC system, right? Since the war on drugs, Black students' access to higher education has decreased. And this is all empowered by this criminalization of Black people. And the reason why I want to just, break down why surveillance technology is a very serious issue is that it also impacts you as UC students. I was one of the organizers for the Wildcat movement across the whole UC system, where last year graduate students were on strike because we don't even really get paid a living wage to be your GSIs. So instead of the university trying to figure out ways to pay us a living wage, they decided to invest. They decided to make a contract with the FBI to surveillance students. So if you look it up, Vice News covered it. So if you Google UC Santa Cruz and military grade surveillance, you can see just how deep the university invested in surveillance technology to stop this movement. And so let me break down what a cell site simulator is. Many of these technologies are based in Black communities, in ghetto communities, in hood communities. But this is a very invasive technology. But honestly, y'all, it was used at UC Santa Cruz against the students there. So really it's used against all people who don't fit into the mold of what the United States government deems as acceptable. So how a cell site simulator works is that it's a van that drives around your community, and there's like a dummy cellular tower. Someone keeps calling. There's like a dummy cellular tower that keeps tricking you into thinking that your cell phone is actually connecting to a legitimate cell tower, but actually you're connecting to like a surveillance truck. And really what's dangerous from this is that these cell site simulators can pick up identifying information about a device like an international mobile subscriber identity number, right? So really can see the whole international network of who you're connecting with. You can see metadata about the calls of like who you're dialing and the duration of calls. They can see the content of your SMS and voice calls. They can intercept data usage and websites visited. I mean, this is very like invasive information. And in the city of Vallejo, we have found that they have used this technology too much. They use it every day. They use it every opportunity to get, but they're not catching any criminals. And so basically, they're basically just surveillancing the Black community in Vallejo, right? Especially in this time of gentrification, when there's a demand for property, when there's a demand for communities to get out, this is what the police do. This is why Mario Woods was killed in San Francisco, right? At the height of gentrification in Hunters Point. He was being surveillanced by the San Francisco Police Department. He was a Black man who was having a mental health crisis. And because of the surveillance of the Hunters Point Bayview, because of gentrification, a mental health crisis led to him being executed in the public street. And so these issues are serious because you're constantly being watched. When you're constantly being watched, I mean, little movements can end to, having over 35, right? And this is actually what happened to Lisa Sampson's son, Ezel Ford, down in Los Angeles. So every day, Black communities are fighting against state repression. And so to really read more about this, get into Dark Matters by Simone Brown, which is like a really awesome book on the history of surveillance of Blackness in this country. Also look into the COINTELPRO papers, which is about the FBI and all of the government documents that were related to surveillance programs against activists, against cultural theorists, against workers. Because it's important to know this history, because it's important to know if you as a technologist are actually developing this technology for good, or are you actually like supporting a subversive agenda for oppression? And many technologists really don't know, right? I know friends who were part of the Google workers who were on strike, who were trying to unionize Google, who were trying to expose how weird Google is, and they were fired and blacklisted from the technology industry. When you're actually really exposing the true power that some of these corporations have, you're in deep shit. And so really what I want you to always question is, in what relationship do we live with the technologies that watch us, right? In what relationship do we live with the technologies that watch us? These technologies are watching you every single day. And that's really the business model of many American corporations, right? We all know about this new craze and new word known as surveillance capitalism. And if you don't know about it, I really want you to invest in that information. Shoshana Zuboff is the real theorist who kind of has foregrounded surveillance capitalism. But I really want you to understand is that from Hal Berrien, his claim is that the relationship between Google and its users is similar to that of doctors and patients. Users are willing to trade information for a personalized service. And so in this example, you're seeing the patient, right? They're going to share personal information with the doctor to receive personalized service. You as the user, you're going to share information to Google to receive personalized service. And so really, this personalization of service is again a part of the neoliberal agenda, is a part of the neoliberal counter-revolution, is a part of the structural adjustment programs that the IMF and the World Bank were very much so invested in, that the grassroots, that civil society, that the NGOs were going to be providing service to the people, and that the corporations were going to be able to take advantage of that lack of civil infrastructure. We're going to be taking advantage of the lack of community, right? Google is only able to be as popular as it is because we don't live in community with each other. We don't know how to share information with each other. We're in a highly individualized society. And so really a lot of this capitalism and these new forms of capital get to exist because of changes in our communities. And so, you know, how does blockchain solve this issue of like surveillance in the Black community, right? I mean, really blockchain provides us a tool to think about how do we organize our communities outside the gaze of the state. And in Simone Brown's work on dark matter, you know, she really comes up with this term called dark surveillance. And dark surveillance is a site of critique as it speaks to Black epistemologies of contending with anti-Black surveillance. What would it look like if we used blockchain with the intention of contending with anti-Black surveillance? What would happen if we applied the knowledge that Ronnie just gave us about oracles to the real questions of anti-Black surveillance? This is the issue at hand. This is what's needed in the movement, right? And some of the use cases of blockchain for social change, I kind of want to go over is that, you know, we want to think creatively. We want to think capaciously too about the possibilities, right? There's really no right or wrong answer, but something I want to just offer you all to think about is the user, right? If we understand that, let's see, cool. So if we understand users, right? If we understand that Black people who engage with the World Wide Web, who are vulnerable to government surveillance, you know, what could be a way to think about building a technology that can protect them, right? Some things you want to consider is like, okay, what about privacy enhancing network protocol design? You want to think about secure software implementations, right? What about that encryption? What's going on with that? You want to think about software engineering and system architecture, right? Which is why I love the blockchain. The blockchain is a system, right? It's a whole data infrastructure, right? We're thinking high level. We're not thinking about little plugins there, right? And we're thinking about programming languages and tool support for these communities, right? If we are serious about the lack of education, right? The miseducation, the intentional lack of literacy preparation in these Black community schools, you know, we're at a disadvantage in terms of resource allocation and education. So sometimes, you know, how can these programming languages be accessible to communities to learn how to code and to build their own infrastructure? You know, you as a scholar and you as a student, you have the power to really push the envelope. So, again, a user, request certificate, we want a certificate, that authority, we're going to issue a certificate, we're going to vouch for the user. I just love this diagram because like, this is what the work is. How are we going to verify validity in these communities, especially in these social justice communities, when we are doing political agenda setting? Who is going to be legitimated in order to have a voice in determining the future direction of a movement, right? This is why we need the blockchain for decision making, right? Because our movements are so disenfranchised. And so again, how does blockchain support the Black revolution? We could do, most importantly, preventing identity theft. I mean, so many people are against Black radicals. To protecting data from tampering, right? Some of the information we share with each other is always tampered with. Even if Black radicals are on organizing meetings with each other, that things will disappear from the cloud. I mean, there's so many horror stories about, lost data. And also protecting critical banking infrastructure, right? If we really understand that Black folks have actually suffered from the US government stealing their money, right? If we're thinking, protecting the banking infrastructure in the Black community is going to be so important. And I actually just put in a image about, I guess it's like a DDoS attack, and like, I guess how an attacker can get one controller, then it could be like all of this, and then you're just like all coming against this one victim. But imagine if you're not even like prepared, you're like, your whole web situation is not secure. You're not even thinking about how to prepare. And so we really want to get, the Black community acclimated to tech literacy so we can protect ourselves from surveillance capitalism. Why? Because there is so much value in Black data. There is so much value. I mean, we're selling data on marketplace on places, but whose data is the most valuable? Whose data actually really matters? Who are we actually trying to study? For example, people of dissent to the government, their data is going to be more valuable, right? And so we're always going to be looking for data. So we have to push back while we still can. And so again, blockchain can provide true autonomy to all without state repression. I really do believe it, but we all have to be united in that mission. And so how do we use the blockchain again as a site of critique? But there's so many sites of critique, right? Another important site of critique is protest, right? And really how the Black Lives Matter movement shows us that surveillance is on the rise, that Black folks are vulnerable again to financial warfare, to militarization. During the NYPD, during the Black Lives Matter protest in 2014, which was like the height of a lot of movements, there was some civil lawsuits that had unveiled that, NYPD had invested in surveillance technology to surveillance protesters and was extensively in their emails and learning about their organizing and where they were and how they were doing everything. And so really what I want you all to figure out is, man, like, what does this mean for you? And what does this mean for democracy? And what does it mean when we're saying we're going to hit the streets, we're going to put our boots in the streets, right? When we know that, the surveillance apparatus is so strong. And so, even thinking about the fact that undercover NYPD officers, right, just recently infiltrated groups of marchers and reported back to superiors with updates while also photographing activists who were seen as leaders during marches from November 2014 to January 2015. So when the police are at the marches and the protests, they're not there to protect us. They're not there to provide essential safety services. They are there to identify leadership. They are there to identify the leadership that they feel is going to overthrow the US government. This government is so afraid of the people waking up to the reality of their subordination. And so the reason I talk so passionately like I do is because I've been around and I've seen the bamboozling. And so really what I want to show you all is an image on the left. This is an image from Berkeley in 2014, when Darren Wilson and his verdict came out as, I don't even know, what was it, not guilty? He killed Michael Brown Jr., who was the young Black man who was killed in Ferguson, Missouri for jaywalking. He was a white supremacist race soldier, and he killed Michael Brown Jr. And there was a bunch of protests in December 2014 in the city of Berkeley. And it was a very scary time, mostly because you didn't really know what was going on. And so to the left is an image of an undercover cop who was seen in the crowd agitating people, right? Was seen in the crowd, and I was out there. It was some weird energy. You really didn't know, like, is everybody out here for the same reason? But this was a particular man who was like lighting things on fire, and people in the community were like, hey, why are you doing this? And he actually pulled a gun out on everybody in the crowd. Comes to find out he was an undercover officer. And then from that incident, he ended up arresting this young Black man in the black shirt. So that was just a really intense moment, but it let me know why, you know, protesting and being out there in the streets is good, right? It's our civil right. It's our fundamental constitutional right, right? The right to assembly. But because of state repression and because of some of the counterintelligence strategies that the US government uses against its own people, it's not safe to be out there because you have undercover cops. To the right, we also have people during the George Floyd protests. There was a lot of discourse of Antifa and people destroying American cities. I mean, many of those people came out to be agitators and who were cops. And so me personally, I'm not out there. I'm not out there with that bullshit. Not out there because you're going to get caught up. But that's why I found blockchain. And that's why we're invested in these technologies. There are so many Black founders in the blockchain space right now who see it, who believe it, who understand it. Dr. Courtney Ziegler is another blockchain entrepreneur who I really, really appreciate and who got me into thinking about the power of blockchain. They created a non-blockchain application called Abolition. And the mission of Abolition is through spare change roundups, everyday people are able to post bail for individuals who otherwise can't afford it. So this was a really cool app where if you were like shopping and your like latte was $5.45, you can round up and then donate that to someone's bail fund. It was a very awesome app. And they're now developing a new blockchain app down at Stanford. So, you know, reach out to them. Another important book is called Bitcoin in Black America by Isaiah Jackson, who's really talking about, wow, imagine if Black people had invested into Bitcoin when it was super low, right? You know, this technically could have been our reparations, right, for slavery, right, in terms of the dollar amount. Because, you know, really, y'all, I want y'all to understand that in 1865, there were approximately 305,000 people enslaved in the United States of America. Today, there are approximately 6.8 million Black people in prison in this country. So, you know, in terms of numbers, in terms of like statistical portion, you know, obviously there is population growth, but not relative to why there is so many Black people in prison in the United States of America. So there's an agenda. And so I recommend this book if you really want to understand, you know, how people are thinking about Bitcoin in the Black community. Also, Chris Cole-I-Am is one of my mentors and people I follow for trading advice. I'm a trader, and yeah, I mean, markets are really interesting to get into, and the crypto market is very interesting. It's highly volatile, it's highly manipulative. So, you know, I have a lot of opinions about that, but the fundamentals are really important to understand, particularly around the volatility of capital markets. You know, just like crypto, the first volatile kind of commodity that we know of, right, is the African body. The African body was on the commodity exchange. The African body was on the foreign exchange market. And so, you know, commodities are highly volatile, right? And so we're always going to need to think of cryptocurrency less as a currency, but really as a commodity, right? Because we got to start thinking about it like that, you know, not pull into the hype, because a lot of the hype that is mobilizing this economy is the Black body. Again, NFTs are the new craze. And it's mostly because the Black body is the cadaver that's mobilizing this craze, right? Top Shot. Man, thousands of dollars are going towards buying these non-fungible tokens of Black people's fungible body. Black people are highly fungible. I think it's ironic that there's so many NFTs of Black people, right? Thank you, Erica, for showing me this Chadwick Boseman NFT that came out at the Grammys this year. But even thinking about this, the commodification of Black death, now in the afterlife of Chadwick Boseman, again, he's even being used to fuel the possibilities around NFT, right? But this, again, it just goes back to the fungibility of the Black body, that the Black body is vulnerable to gratuitous violence. And when you have that vulnerability, your struggles, your pain gets obfuscated, it gets abstracted. But we need to return and we need to concretize the real struggles of this community. And so, to get further acclimated to the discourse, please, please, please do your reading and your research. Really understand that we want sovereignty over capital. This is not our homeland, right? Some of us are Indigenous and Black, but many of us are stolen Africans. And so we want sovereignty over capital, right? In the Communist Manifesto, Marx defines capital as common property that is made through collective, right? And so the Black body has been the common property of the American empire, and collectively we consent to the dehumanization of the Black body for the purpose and the growth of the US economy. And so if you really want to understand this argument even further, check out these 3 books. Kawasi Balagoon, A Soldier Story. He's a new African anarchist, really the founder of anarchism. He was a political prisoner, a part of the Black Liberation Army. We also have Anarchism and the Black Revolution by who, again, this is the fundamental text on what it means to embrace anarchism as a Black revolutionary. And then The War Before by Safia Bukhari, who's a Black woman who was also a political prisoner, who really speaks about, okay, like, what are we doing, right? Like, we're saying we're committed towards justice and liberation, but the ways that we operate every day is not leading towards that. And so really, we have to lead and move towards liberation and true freedom. And so if you want to connect with me, I'm going to be building up my own kind of like intellectual community on this platform called Understory Co-op, my own Black anarchist community here. So, really, I want us to start practicing and start building these communities and start tangibly being the change we wish to be in the world, or start tangibly being this change we want to see in the world, right? You have to be the change, right? A lot of people are like, oh, what can I do? What can I do? But you really want to think about what ways of being are required of me to really change this world. Because it's going to have to take a different you, and it's going to have to take a new train of thought to really take this system down. So I really appreciate you all for being open-minded to listening to my presentation. I'm excited to just have conversation with you all. And yeah, let's keep fighting, fight the power.
Yay! Thank you so much, Kirby. You have like 100 questions in the chat right now.
Cool. No, let's talk about it. I mean, it's complicated, it's messy, right? I see someone disagrees. Cool. Go, well, let's talk about it. Let's get messy. What's good? Thank you all for hearing me out.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people were really interested, wanted to dig a little deeper. But if anyone asks,
ask a live question?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. If anyone wants to unmute and ask a live question, go ahead.
Perfect. Well, thank you for giving a minute of your time to express what you've been thinking about for the last however long you've been thinking about this. I've also done the same since I read the Bitcoin white paper in 2011. I've been trying to figure out how I can put my situation, my social inclinings into this space as well. I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned abolition earlier, are there any other blockchain applications in this space that you see promising?
No, not really, right? Because it's so new, but we're in community, right? And I'm in community with people who are actively building. A lot of this information I've learned about blockchain coming from formerly incarcerated people who've been learning this in jail, right? And they're on YouTube and they're learning this information, right? And so I've had to even open up my mind to learning from people who have this information and understand the blockchain in different ways. And so honestly, I'm actively in community. And so that's what I'm saying about this moment. I actually turned down a job at a startup because I was like this is going to be my community. Like, no, like it's such a new industry right now that we have to come together and figure out how to really build that solution. So the main person who is really working on an awesome mutual aid platform is Dr. Courtney Ziegler, and they're at the Stanford Digital Civil Society Lab right now. So I would hit them up ASAP while they're still a fellow there and see what they're working on.
Sure, I'll definitely do that. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Oh yeah. And hit me up too. I'm working on Understory and developing on that platform right now as well.
Hi. I kind of have a question as well that I mentioned in the chat earlier. It's kind of similar to also Key's question. It's that how do you see groups that represent flawed ideas like white supremacy be punished given the nature of decentralization? And just because like someone also mentioned, it's like just because like a central authority here, like some sort of central authority, like necessary to punish those groups?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I don't believe in punishment, right? Because punishment is the apparatus and the ways of being that comes from colonialism. That colonialism was the economic and the political system that introduced to the world brute force. In the transition from feudalism to capitalism, the main distinction is terrorism, right? So we have capitalism through violence. And so what we want is a revolution, and we want a new way of being. So the issue is not us collaborating with the government to stop the white supremacists, because we know that the government is the white supremacists. So that they will, walk the journey with us, right? All the way up to like, oh, we're stopping the white supremacists and the FBI, right? And then we'll be smack dab with something like Watergate, right? Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal was so important, his phones were wiretapped. Surveillance is a very, very strategic game of getting information that wouldn't be revealed to you because you're not in a position of power. When they say you're not at the table, they say you're on the menu. And so the issue is not punishing white supremacists. The issue is we don't have enough political education, we don't have enough community, and we don't have enough information to understand that even white supremacists don't even know why they're white supremacists. And so if you really do want to understand how white people, again, were manipulated, right? There's a really good book called Wages of Whiteness by David Rodiger. Wages of Whiteness is such a good book, which talks about how the United States of America got away with not even paying white people. That the United States of America paid white men who worked on those plantations with the promise of whiteness, right? That white men couldn't go feed their families at home because the plantation owner, because the landowner, because the aristocracy was looking down on the peasant white man and was saying, hey, you gotta be racist. You gotta beat that Black man if you wanna be a part of the American empire. And so we have to really think about what are we really trying to dismantle here? We're trying to dismantle hundreds of years of destroyed familial relationships. We're trying to address hundreds and hundreds of years of the United States being a financial global power because of the surplus capital left over from plantation slavery. We're trying to fight a very, very large power structure. So I don't believe in punishment of white supremacists. I believe more so that we need to get organized and that we need to educate each other, technologists for social good, because many people are being technologists to keep growing the fascist corporate empire known as the United States of America.
Okay, thank you. So I guess you would say that the solution maybe lies more in like earlier education, like early age education, kind of setting that foundation.
Yeah, and it really requires people to decolonize their mind. So basically, I'm planting mustard seeds in your mind. You know what a mustard seed is? So mustard seed, you put a mustard seed in your mouth. It's like very small. You put it in your mouth and then it bursts with explosion. It's like you put a whole packet of mustard in your mouth. So I'm gonna drop little words But you got to make sure that you let that mustard seed blossom in your mouth, right? Blossom in your mind to grow and keep growing, because the solution is decolonization, right? Because of the fact that we have been manipulated because of this parasitic economic system to keep working day in, day out, to not be in community or relationship with each other. We don't even know what a real functional society looks like without police, without military, without borders, without division, without social security numbers, without bureaucracy, right? And so we have a scholar known as Utsa McKnight. I'll put him in the chat if you're really interested. And he talks about administrative violence. And Dean Spade is a really good scholar who talks about this as well. But administrative violence is what the white community uses against people of color to make sure that we really don't have any progress in political, economic, or civil society, right? So the issue is not just early education, it's also, again, questioning what ways of being are going to be required of me. Who do I have to be? What do I have to wake up to? What realities and what skeletons in my closet must I confront?
All right, thank you. Not the biggest fan of mustard, but that was really insightful.
Of course. I think Edison asked, when you say white community, so again, white is not a color, it's an attitude. You can be the blackest man on earth and you'll still be a white man. That it's not about this, y'all. We all have two eyes, one nose, one mouth, two ears. We all feel the same sunlight. We all see the same moonlight. But how white supremacy has functioned over the last kind of 200 years is that white community political sovereignty is the only message. Carl Schmitt is a constitutional lawyer. He is the chief architect of Nazism. Carl Schmitt came to the United States of America to learn how to set up Nazi Germany because of the Jim Crow South, because of the administrative violence the white Southerners were enacting onto its Black population, right? So you know, it's not about white people. It's about who has political sovereignty in this earth, right? Who has the power to say no and who has the power to say yes. Cool. What else? What y'all thinking about? Y'all got like a race in your class, like 20 minutes. We got it. All of those complex, awkward things you wanted to know about what's really required for this moment at hand. You know, let's talk about it. Because you have an obligation. You really do. Being at this university, being in these courses, to pay it forward. So let's get into it. What else y'all got?
I got one. All right, Kirby. So I have a problem, at least in my communities, about with regards to education. So I come from an immigrant background, and so for most of us, technology isn't accessible. So I kind of struggle finding a way to even start to explain Ethereum or Bitcoin to my parents in Spanish. So I was wondering whether or not have you seen any issues or any way to ease communities, underrepresented communities into these kind of technologies that make it easier to consume and start to understand what the implications and benefits to them are.
Yeah, so that's a deep question, and right, especially coming from our communities, Black and Brown communities. Let me just break down the stats. In California state prisons, 45% of the people in prisons are Latino, 36% of the people in prison are Black, 11% of the people in prison are white, 8% of the people in prison are considered other, right? So You know, there's definitely some racialization going on in education, right? That there's a reason why, again, UC Berkeley is less than 2%, is better. So, I mean, you know, at this university, there's only less than 2% Black students. Again, I'll tell you that the California State Prison has 36%. I'll let you know again that the California State population is 6% Black. So we are highly set up for failure. You know, we have lost the game before we've even begun to play, right? And that's the issue around equity, right? And so all of this shit about equality and anti-racism, y'all, as technologists, you gotta understand, we are actually fighting for equity. At this point, it's equity or war. Because I've been on the front lines fighting for education access for Black students at this university for now 8 years. That when there was the whole tech boom, when Black students were at this university and we were actually being blocked out of the major, the EECS major, when professors used to call Black students nigger, right? When we couldn't actually get an education in these universities due to hostility, other students were able to be in these classes. Other students were able to get equity shares in early startups and then was able to cash out on them stocks because they weren't excluded. Some students who I went to school with in 2013 are millionaires today because they were accepted into the educational environment. When I entered Berkeley, I was the only Black student who was accepted into the College of Environmental Design, the only Black student. In my classes, we watched a film of people who were in Mississippi. And it was a class, and my people are from Mississippi. And everybody in the class was laughing at these Black people because they couldn't speak English. They was like, what country? Are they in America? And I'm like, wow, these are my people. I come from the Mississippi Delta. My people have been here since the 1700s. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. People don't even understand how severely some communities in this country are severely undereducated. That we had things such as the Braceto program. Do we know about the Braceto program? Okay, so the Braceto program was a whole work program that the United States of America, right, during World War II, was able to become a world power. Why? Because it was distributing food to all of these poor third world countries through this program known as PL 480. PL 480 is why everybody in the world is suffering from world hunger. PL 480 is why in India, in the Indian economy, they prioritize exports over feeding their own people. It's because of large economic institutions. And so, you know, it is education, it is our family not understanding, but why the fuck would they want to understand? What are they seeking to understand? I had so many people be manipulated by all of this Bitcoin stuff. You know, many Black people in the community are being manipulated by this NFT craze. You have rappers like Waka Flocka, Jim Jones, all these random Black people who don't know technology, who have not been to school, who are convincing Black people to invest their whole life savings into cryptocurrency, like it's a scam. So Black people don't have an understanding of volatility of markets. And it's not just Black people, it's most disenfranchised people who don't have access to capital. You're going to take all of the money you have and you're going to put it in Bitcoin because you done seen this at an all-time high and it's growing in percentage and all of this and all these people who can talk real fast are convincing you to blah, 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 blah. And that's how communities become poor overnight. That's how 2008 happened with the predatory loans, right? So I'll get back to the Braceto program and why it's really fucked up. The Braceto program was a situation where we got migrant laborers from Mexico during the 1930s and the 40s to come over to the United States of America and actually farm all throughout the state of California for free, basically, for free. You had migrant laborers from Mexico through the Braceto program come to California and work for free for the promise of citizenship for their children. The Braceto program, BRACERO. This is the labor force that is helping the PL 480 program be and make America be the largest food grain producer in the world. It's on the free labor of Mexican migrants in the 1930s and 1940s. What the US government decided to do after the war was over, they said, you motherfuckers gotta go back to Mexico, y'all ain't getting shit. So then migrant workers, they was like, what the fuck you mean? I've been working here for free. They said, nah, you an immigrant. And this is around the time Border Patrol starts right? So they created a whole policing institution when they know that they was promising them people to get paid, and created a whole border patrol force. If you don't believe me, read a book called The End of the Myth by Greg Grandin. That our communities have been highly manipulated. And so it's not really your family, right? Your family's not going to be the first line of defense. It's going to be you as the technologist who know how to build technology for it to be relatable to our communities. It has to be us as the first line of defense. That's why I'm saying this industry is so new. The lane is so open and wide, and we still have the opportunity to make this be a social justice mission. You know what I'm saying?
I get that. I appreciate you for your answer. Thank you.
And if you really want to learn about the consequences of the Bracero program and the Depatriate for Mexicans in this state, please look at a movie called No Mas Bebes. You can find it on OskyCat, and it's about the forced sterilization program against Latina mothers in the 1970s, right? Because the US government was like, fuck, y'all are still here? Y'all are still here, right?
Man, fuck this institution, dude. Like, I swear.
Well,
You've been on some.
You got to be critical of it, right? Because it's the US government who coordinates with Coinbase in order to get the KYC verification so they can still know at the end of the day how to tax your ass for the cryptocurrency. So at the day, we got to be mindful of where this industry is heading, how we can still create autonomous institutions before it becomes completely taken over by the enterprises. And it's going to be hard work, you know? You got whole enterprises against dudes in their garage trying to be blockchain enthusiasts. I mean, it's really a gap out there. So we're going to need all hands on deck.
I get that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kirby, there's some interesting discourse in the chat as well happening right now about NFTs and in what you present on that I think also just relates to, like, you know, how we contextualize like wealthy individuals as part of like a larger system. But I'm curious, you know, if you've had a chance to look at that.
No, I'm never good at chats. I in virtual learning has been horrible with the chats. But this is what I can say, because people are skeptic. They're like, man, the fucking athletes, they make so much more money, and then they're making more money and more money on top of more money. Fuck the athletes, they're not oppressed, right? But y'all, most of our wealth in this Black community is in fucking athletes. Like, the billionaires of Black people in this world are not even in America. Like, we always talk about Oprah and fucking Kanye. You know nothing about the Nigerian oil tycoons. Nothing. You know nothing about the fucking mineral reserve fucking miners out of South Africa who are Black. You know, so the wealth that these athletes have is relative to the real wealth that many people have who are in industry. And even the people who control and own these slaves, AKA athletes, make more money than these athletes collectively combined. You have shareholders, dividends. I mean, this industry, the athletic sports industrial complex industry, provides jobs, arenas, construction to so many people off of the backs, just like this whole country. This country's first economic system was plantation slavery. Plantation slavery is a whole economic system of brute work. You have to break a slave where they work sun up and sun down for max profit. And this was in tandem with the Industrial Revolution. So even in America, you have the Industrial Revolution, the invention of machinery that is speeding up production, but you're still going to utilize a whole race of slaves. Do you know how much wealth comes as a byproduct of access to capital because you're not paying wages? Do you know how much wealth can be amassed because of the access to technology, because of the Industrial Revolution, because you're an extended corporation of the British Empire, so you now get materials to help support the plantation economy? So if you look at this book called This Half Has Never Been Told, it's a really good book about slavery. And it's like a big ass book. You have to really understand economics. You have to understand economics, racial capitalism. Because yeah, it's not going to make sense. Why the fuck is LeBron James oppressed? I mean, he's not. Like, I mean, that's not the fucking point. The point is, there are whole industries made on the backs of Blacks. I want to share with you another story about a good friend of ours. His name was Ted Agu. I also want you to check this out. So again, Ted Agu was a football player here at the University of California. Rest his heart, rest in soul, rest in peace. Murdered by this greedy corporate institution, right? Check out his story. Ted Agu, I was a freshman here in 2014. He died February 2014. He was a Black student athlete who was overworked to death. Black student athletes, they work out every day, all day. At the time, you know, and I'll get into the context why athletics is very different now. But at the time, there was so much pressure on Cal Athletics in 2014 because they had just built Memorial Stadium. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. They had access to government bonds to build that stadium, a stadium which was not necessary. So they took government loans, government subsidized loans with low interest rates that could have went to local communities, that could have went to actual communities that need infrastructure projects. But the University of California was so fucking selfish. They built the Memorial Stadium with that subsidized loans. And there was so much pressure to pay back those loans that they worked them Black student athletes like fucking slaves, right? Day in, day out. Y'all don't even really, y'all can't even imagine how big football culture was in 2013, 2014, because they needed that stadium packed. They needed every motherfucker in Berkeley in that motherfucking stadium to pay back that loan. Do you understand what the fuck I'm saying? So they worked that young Black boy to death. He died on the football field, and the University of California refused to call medical staff because they said he could keep going. They said that he could keep working. So if you really don't feel bad, if you really can't even imagine the plight of Black people in this country today, just think about Ted Agu. Think about Ted Agu as a Black student at the University of California, Berkeley, who died on the football field because the medical staff said he can keep going, because we need to win that championship. And since that moment, you all don't know nothing about Ted Agu. You know nothing about his name. You know nothing. You know nothing about the countless students that have died at this university, right? And that's why you as Berkeley students need to be conscious, need to be aware, because there is so much at play. So much at play. You think the world is one way, but man, behind the veil, right? There is so much at play. And so that's why we got to rise up and respond back. I hope that answers that question about NFTs and athletes and all of that. The simple fact is that we're dying out here for other people to have access to the American dream. That's not okay. Not okay. Okay, I see one comment about student athletes. Okay, so good. So again, so university has to pay out a wrongful death lawsuit. So what they do, they punish Black student athletes and they never fucking recruit Black student athletes ever again. So Cal Athletics is actually one of the widest football teams in the goddamn country. Just so you all know that this is the severe backlash that you face when you say Black Lives Matter. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really about the athletes. It's about the limited options that Black people have to participate in the American economic structure. You can only really access wealth being a rapper or an athlete. You don't have Jackie Chan talking on behalf of China in their politics, but we expect Kanye West to. We expect celebrities to, right? We expect LeBron James to. It just doesn't work like that. And I want you all to be very aware that there are institutions at play, like the media, that we need to use blockchain for to counter the propaganda. Because we are human beings. We have a life, we have children, right? Dwayne Wright, a father, killed in a traffic stop. So the world that we live in, nobody cares to give the consideration of Black life, the nuance that it deserves. But if you care, if you're really committed to being different, to being the change we wish to see in the world, you have to contend with these issues. And read. I mean, Ted Agu's case changed the game. It's a really intense lawsuit. Read it. If you don't believe in the fight, read it. Because education, we're miseducated. Most people don't know about the history of America. And that's why we're dedicated, and that's why we're here in this education space, right? So I really do appreciate y'all for hearing me out. It's all complicated, but we're dedicated to education and liberation. I love it. It's complicated. Probably some of this shit y'all heard tonight, you're like, what the fuck? But again, it's the mustard seed. It's the mustard seed, y'all. Because there's gonna be some shit that's gonna happen over the next 10 years. You're gonna be like, what the fuck? You're gonna be like, what the fuck? 10 years from now, promise. Promise, it's gonna look fucking crazy. And so get prepared and join communities, especially as technologists. You are needed. So again, I work on anti-surveillance technology work, policy advocacy. I work on my own work for reparations. I help lobby in the government, all of that. We are on the move because, yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just have a quick question. You mentioned surveillance. So what do we do about it? What do we do with surveillance? How do we do something on it?
So definitely look up Deborah Rashi. Y'all know her? So basically what we need technologists for right now is to do audits on surveillance technology and to monitor how the technology is being used and how it's being used against communities. And so Deborah Rashi is a woman who created this auditing process, right? To actually start auditing technologies for how they're actually being used against users, how they're being manipulated. So really the work of having technologists and policy is to actually monitor development of some of these technologies. That's what I would say as a technologist is your role. Me as an activist and social scientist, you know, I get data on social equity. I get data on arrest rates related to economic data. You know, I think about the confinement and the containment of trauma, of lack of resources and what that. I think about heat maps, right? So I make heat maps as a geographer where I get to see where police spend most of their time in communities, and we see that they only frequent certain communities more than others, right? But then we correlate that data to service calls. So we see that the police are in all of these areas, but they're not being called. So nobody called you. So basically you're just an occupying force. So, you know, that's why we need researchers and data, right? In the work. So if you want to tap in with me, definitely reach out. I'm here.
For sure, appreciate that. I will.
Sweet. Well, Kirby, thank you so much for everything and for everyone else who asked questions, participated in the chat, and was really active today.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for all your insights and for coming to speak with all of us. Well, we're almost at time, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for sticking out this semester and for joining us, and hopefully I'll learn a few things over the course of the semester. And I guess I'll let Ava say a few words as well, but we're always here. If you want to reach out to us, we're always happy to chat. So even though our just pretty much wrapped up this semester, we'll be here. So yeah, you have both our emails, and then we can attach Kirby and Ronnie's emails as well if that works, if you want to reach out to them or to ask any questions. But other than that, thank you so much for a great semester.
Yeah, no, you said it very well. Thank you guys. We've really enjoyed teaching you this semester. It was both of our first time leading this decal. So thank you for bearing with us. I just sent the link to the feedback form in the chat. Please fill that out if you haven't yet. And if you did fill it out and we didn't catch you on the second form, please fill it out again, just to make sure that you get credit for that. All your assignments are due in 1 week, so be sure to get that in, your quizzes, your discussions, your final project. And our emails are always open. Please feel free to reach out. And yeah, we're teaching this again next semester. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to tell your friends to sign up in the fall. and we're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.